Hi, and welcome to Extreme Connect 2024 User Conference. This session is on the top 10 network security best practices for Zero Trust. I'm Ed Kohler, and I'm going to be your host for this session. Just a safe harbor statement before we continue. And our agenda. We're going to do an introduction, then we're going to jump right into the best security practices. Going to leave you with some practical tips that you can take home, and then finally, we'll have our conclusions. It's quite obvious that no one is immune from suffering a data breach. Many of you listening have probably gone through such an event. It's also obvious that there is no one size fits all strategy for creating a proper security posture. The reality is that what's right for you is going to be affected not only by the industry you're in and what data you need and when you need it and where you need it, but also the expectation of your customers, your employees, and any other stakeholders that you have involved, as well as the regulatory requirements and the limitations of your existing infrastructure and technology. There are also many other factors as well, many of which are outside of your control, and one of those is the evolving cyber landscape. So, we at Extreme believe that a good network security strategy is one that's multi level. And more importantly, one that not only meets your needs of today, but one that is capable of evolving to the changing circumstances that you're inevitably going to face tomorrow. Realize that there are several trends occurring within the cybersecurity space. We have a separate session on the threat landscape of 2024. It talks about the threats, but more importantly, it talks about the trends that you need to pay attention to in the industry at whole, because it will give you a better capability to prepare. And these top 10 network security practices will help you in that preparation. So, without further ado, here are the top 10 network security best practices that you can implement. And these best practices are based on a number of experts, based on decades of experience of implementing smart, cost effective, secure networks. Here are the 10. Now, I want to emphasize that these are not steps, and they should not be construed as steps. So it's not like first you do a risk assessment, then you do zero trust approach, then you do, that's not the way it works. These are more categories of interest. And many of these lead on to one another, or many are related to one another. All of these will be occurring tandemly within a proper security posture that's based on zero trust. So, we're going to talk about each of these categories of interest, and we're going to talk about how some of the other categories interrelate as we move forward. You will see something of a holistic strategy as we move forward through this. So these should not be construed as separate. They should be construed as interrelated and complementary. The first best practice we're going to talk about is risk assessment. This is basically identifying vulnerabilities in what you have in your network. Now, that gets to the point where, in order to do a proper risk assessment, you have to understand what's in your network. So you have to that's a pretty big barrel, and lots of people can't answer that. And we're going to talk about that separately. So that doesn't mean you're frozen in the sand. You can basically move ahead and do something about it. So you can turn around and identify what's most critical for your business. And if you don't know what that is, you can go to your business superiors. They'll be happy to point out the systems that absolutely need to run and the applications that absolutely need to be available in order for your organization to function. So you want to get that out of the way. That will at least enable you to make a first initial assessment of where you're at. Not only consider your IT environment, but also, particularly if you're in manufacturing, consider any operational technologies or industrial control systems that you may have. And then almost every network has Internet of Things, IoT. And with Internet of Things, think HVAC. Think about conference room management systems. Think about video surveillance systems. All of them classify as IoT environments. All of them are potential avenues for incursion, and all of them should be properly segmented away. And that's a subject that we'll have later. Prioritize. Again, if you can't do that, your business superiors will be able to do that. They'll be able to tell you exactly what's more important to consider and absolutely what has to be up and running and available. If you're not capable of doing this, or if this is your first time in doing a risk assessment, you may want to bring in someone from the outside. Now, I also want to point out that there are plenty of areas, if you just do a Google on risk assessment, you can find plenty of great ebooks, plenty of great webinars that step you through the proper steps to do a risk assessment in your environment. And you'll find that many of them incorporate the 10 things, the 10 categories of interest that we're going to talk about here in this session. So many times, if this is your first time, you may want to consider bringing in someone in at that point. You can take it over and bring it on from that point on, because you do have to realize that risk assessment is not a one-time thing. This is something that's cyclic, and you will need to do it on a regular basis. Incorporate a zero trust approach. Now, this may seem like a catch-22 in the fact that that's what the presentation is about, but it's an important philosophy. Realize that zero trust security is an IT security model. It's not a product. It's a set of practices that you're going to implement. And then one of these foundational aspects is the assumption that the attacker's already in your network. This is an important premise, an important foundation for a proper zero trust practice. That's validated by the statistics shown on this screen. 34% of data breaches involved internal actors. That's right from a Verizon security report. So we need to consider that that is a reality. So we want to start from the vantage point that no human or no device is trusted at face value. In order to realize that, even after they're given access to the network, we have to have visibility and monitoring. So as soon as behaviors change within a user, for instance, or a particular device or system, we want to have the visibility and monitoring to catch those changes of behavior. And realize that firewalls are not really enough to do this. And we'll talk about that when we talk about visibility. And make sure that you educate your staff, and make sure you educate your end users, and make sure you have proper security practices and policies in place. Make sure that they're strictly enforced. And I'm not saying be real heavy-handed about it, but do be strict about it and have very, very few exceptions to the rule. This lends off to visibility. In order to do a proper risk assessment, in order to implement a zero trust philosophy, we have to have visibility. And we have to have this not only north-south, but we have to have this east-west as well, given that a lot of malware spreads through east-west traffic patterns. Make sure that you have the appropriate visibility. Make sure you know what's on your network. An interesting statistic, 61% of those polled had low to no confidence that they knew every device connected to their network. I often take the poll of my audiences when I speak, particularly when I'm doing this presentation, and I have to say that this stat kind of remains valid. A good degree of people really don't know every device that's connected to the network. And when you think about it, that's a fairly high bar. Some have gotten to the point where they at least know the device types. They may not know every device, but they know the device types and they have appropriate policies for each device type. But you really need to reach that epitome of knowing everything that's on your network. Once you can do that, then you can do a proper risk assessment. You can do a proper scope of concern. And some of the other practices that we're going to talk about will add that complementary to it. It's important to realize that visibility is a very, very important piece. Firewalls can give you a lot of visibility on north-south, but really things like application telemetry, that's what's going to give you that east-west visibility. You want to make sure that you're making investments as that as well, because that really can only come from your network. Policy-based access control. This touches on the aspects of our universal zero trust network access solution, because you want to, once you enable someone onto the network, you don't want to basically have a you're in or you're out type of binary approach. You want to have highly granular policies. And the philosophy of zero trust network access is that I'm only giving you access for the systems and the applications and services you need and nothing more. So we can actually marry this with certain dark VSN services that we could do within the fabric architecture to lock systems and applications into those dark profiles. And this, again, leverages on this multi-layered security concept within your overall posture. Remember that you need to tailor to the environment, and you need to have policies that not only reflect what's on premise, but also what's in the cloud as well, and understand what policies you can leverage in the cloud. Realize that you need strong monitoring of user systems, both into and out of segments using firewalls, and you also want to have a good handle on the east-west visibility as well. Keep in mind that anomalies of east-west visibility is key. East-west traffic is often used by botnets and things of that nature for propagation within the network environment. You want to have logs and you want to audit all access, and that's going to help you build an appropriate inventory of what you have within your network, and that's going to give you a more granular risk assessment as you move forward in time. Network segmentation. Network segmentation is very key. It provides isolation and protection, as was pointed out by a national security agency expert. In the event of a breach, segmentation is the difference between a security incident and a catastrophe. And that statement is very true. I happen to know the individual that made these statements. Segmenting creates dead ends. It creates barriers for malicious attackers or those of criminal intent. And it basically forces them to make noise. It forces them to create anomalies because they have to try to get out of whatever segment they're in, because it's very seldom that they're going to be landing in the segment where their target is. They have to incur into the network, and they usually compromise somebody's device or some sort of IoT device in order to gain that incurage. If you have your appropriate segmentation and you're segmenting IoT and IT, well, now using IoT as an incursion into the IT systems becomes very difficult because you have isolation between those domains of interest. Make sure you have strong security access controls so you know who, when, and what on these different segments. Make sure you have an audit trail, and if possible, build tiered environments. Tiered environments are very, very powerful in the fact that it creates a morass for the attacker, particularly if you're using something like Extreme's enterprise fabric, which is completely Ethernet. So it's very, very dark, very hard to enumerate. In a tiered segmented environment, it puts the attacker in the dark and it puts them into a morass of segmentation, and it forces them to make noise. It forces them to create anomalies, and that's really what you're going to look for. And getting on anomalies, this is one of the side benefits of proper network segmentation is the fact that when you've segmented devices, IoT for instance, they have very consistent patterns of behavior. They do the same thing 24 by 7 and they execute and they communicate to the same systems. If you see any anomalies, that shows that something's wrong. Something needs to be investigated. Now, you might not see that anomaly if the IoT systems are mixed in with the other traffic. However, if they're appropriately segmented and all you have is the IoT behaviors on that segment, anomalies become very easy to see. And this is really some of the values that network segmentation can bring, not only to separation of interests and protection, but also visibility. Data compliance is important. We're going to be quick on this, however, because I don't want to spend a lot of time. It's fairly straightforward. You need to understand the vertical you're in before you consider the compliance that you're liable to. Make sure you're meeting compliance with your industry standards and regulations, and you want to automate that as much as possible. It's largely a static affair, and when they do change, it's in a lump sum. So this is something that actually can be automated fairly easy. You can automate the reporting, and some of the value of automating some of these activities is that it eliminates the manual activity and consequently cuts down on the hours required and then also any errors that could be induced by human input. IoT security is also an important aspect. This goes very closely with visibility and segmentation, and that's shown on this slide. IoT systems can be very quickly compromised, but it takes a long time to discover the breach, particularly if the IoT devices are mixed in with the rest of the network. So we want to have policies and we want to have those enforced against segmentation. And then we want to have analytics within those segments to see any anomalies. And any anomalies should be flagged and investigated relatively quickly because that's an anomaly and it could be a bug, could be a problem with the devices, but many times what you'll find is that it is a possible intrusion of malicious code. For instance, a botnet will look to use east-west traffic patterns within the segment to propagate itself. and then look for any outbound segments in order to propagate itself further. Again, if your segmentation is tiered and you have the appropriate analytics within those segments, you're going to catch those patterns. Number 8, AI and ML emerging technologies. They're no longer emerging, and this is showing a sign of hope in that AI is very good at picking out patterns in large, vast quantities of data. Humans aren't very good at that. More importantly, certain vendors are kind of honing artificial intelligence. So some firewall vendors are coming out with artificial intelligence as well. Security event and information management vendors are coming out with artificial intelligence. And this is very important. This is very powerful because they can see the patterns. And with the appropriate AI technology, you can basically identify not only the type of threat that you're facing, but perhaps the advanced persistent threat group and the symptoms thereof, saying, hey, this is a high probability that this is advanced persisting threat group X versus Y. That's very important information. AI can do that. That's very important. It will accelerate the early identifications and response to threats as well. It will give better process and act on vast amounts of data, and it will allow you to do more with less, particularly if you're kind of limited from a staffing perspective, that we can depend on AI to do a lot of that summary. We don't remove humans from the loop. However, AI can do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. We do have to be cautious, however. Hackers are leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning technology. AI modeled malware can evade sandboxing. AI embedded capabilities within botnets is becoming increasingly prevalent. AI enabled spear phishing increases attacks at a vast scale and also increases their ingenuity and capabilities as well. Again, when I talk about the 2024 threat landscape session, I go into details on how the adversaries are using artificial intelligence. It's an important trend to realize, and it's something that you can't stop, so you best be prepared for it. Cloud security, it's important to maintain a multi-level approach and make sure it extends between the public, the hybrid, and the private if you have that type of footprint. Know what your footprint is, know what data is in your cloud, why it's there, and make sure you have appropriate security practices. Make sure you understand the differences of the policy environments in the cloud versus the policy environments in the on-premise data footprint. Make sure you're meeting regulatory requirements. Comprehensive business continuity and disaster recovery can be done within the cloud. However, make sure that they're offline backups. Offline backups are your best insurance against a ransomware attack. As a matter of fact, it's your last form of defense, because if all previous defenses do not work, at least if you've got a relatively recent offline backup, you can get your organization back up and running without having to pay that ransom. Make sure you're aligned with the Cloud Security Alliance recommendations, and above all, become part of that organization. I talk about that in the threat landscape. It's important to leverage MITRE. It's important to leverage the Cloud Security Alliance. These are all organizations that are available to you many times for free. Finally, an open security ecosystem. Try to avoid proprietary security solutions because you do get locked in, and you get locked into that set of vendors and their roadmaps. When possible, deploy systems that can be integrated together, automated threat detection, things of that nature. Make sure that these things can act in a cohesive ecosystem, because once you do, then you can cross leverage the technology. That's very important. So in your consideration, consider your virus detection, consider your firewalls. All of this is very important, but it's more important to make sure that they're open and that you can cross leverage them in your overall security posture. Extreme Networks realizes it's not a security company. However, we do bring things to the table that can complement your security posture. Obviously, I talked about the universal zero trust network access. That's an important facet, but we also have an air interface protection through the air defense capabilities. And then we also have our network fabric technology and our SD-WAN portfolio. These provide very good capabilities. And then we have within our wired and wireless element level security as well. And then we have integration partners within the ecosystem. Keep in mind that an open ecosystem is best, but we do have some integrations that we've gone further on. And again, Checkpoint, Palo Alto, and Zscaler are examples of those partner integrations. Just some supporting statistics for you, very quick. You can review these at your convenience. And then finally, let's move into some practical tips before we close. First of all, set the foundation. Get the basics right. Get your access controls in place. Get your password controls in place. Make sure that they're strong. Make sure that you're forcing rotation of these passwords and making sure that they're relatively complex to strengthen your overall security posture. Look at additions to just access and password controls. Look at extensions such as MFA, things of that nature. Patch management, regular patch deployment. Keep in mind that if you do that, then you can stop upwards to 70% of what's going on. Make sure you're doing that. It's very, very important. It's a very important first step. Make sure you're using the most updated OSs and the most recent patch. Make sure you have a management to keep track of that as well. Implement something like a patching Tuesday. That's an important thing because that's when it all comes out. Make sure you implement it. And again, prioritize. Know what systems really need to be up to date. Know what systems really need to be patched, and complements in with the rest of the practice. Training. Make sure you know what's going on and make sure that people are appropriately trained. And then offline backups. Make sure that we have those in place. These are really 4 things that you can do to kind of give you a good step forward. And then consider the factor of the human. Consider your users. Execute formal educational campaigns on security. We do here at Extreme. That's an important facet of what we do. Run phishing campaigns on your user population. Keep track, particularly on those that fall for the campaigns on multiple times. Make sure they get extra education to be sure that they're able to identify possible phishing attempts. This is an important exercise, and we, again, do that internal with an Extreme, and it's given us a lot of visibility. And it's also allowed us to go back to certain users and re-educate them, and that gives us an overall stronger security profile at the end of the day. MITRE attack and defense. I talked about this on a couple of occasions in this session. This basically describes cyber adversary behavior and provides a common taxonomy for understanding both offense and defense. It's an important piece in your overall security posture. Make sure you incorporate this and make sure your teams understand how to use the tool. Again, it's free, it's available, and the website is here. There are several facets of MITRE, and that would warrant a whole presentation within itself, so I'm not going to go there. Thinking about doing something specific on it in the future, particularly with the advent of AI, because as I said earlier, artificial intelligence can use MITRE as a large language backend repository. And really, at that point, AI could really become very powerful as far as looking at your SIM and seeing symptoms and matching tactics and behaviors and methods that a human might not recognize. And this I see as a very, very powerful capability. 15 indicators of compromise. We're not going to go into details here, but this is basically a handy list to use and compare with MITRE ATT&CK. Realize that many of these will be in the tactics and methods that different attack groups will use. So look for these types of flags within your environment, and it'll kind of give you the first step and the first indication that something's not right within your network infrastructure. DNS, this is one of your biggest windows of vulnerability. Make sure you're locking down your DNS environments. Make sure you're preventing split tunnel behaviors within your VPNs. Make sure those systems are locked down so you control their behavior. Remember, you can't really properly monitor a split tunnel behavior, so that's really not something you want within your network. Lock down your networks to allow DNS queries from local systems only. Block outbound for port 53, unless you have a trusted DNS source. And obviously, you create a policy for that. Look for questionable patterns in your DNS logs, outside of normal hours. Non-standard naming convention, and you can see some real wacky naming conventions in the malware arena. Long tail log queries that usually indicate something is trying to walk your DNS Separate your traffic, separate your IoT, your users, and your data centers from a policy perspective. That will help in granularity, and be aware of Tor activity. Be aware of the dark web. Once that information gets out onto the dark web, it's very, very difficult to delimit or take it off. Once information gets out there, it's out there. Conclusions and summary as we close here. Network security issues, they're here to stay. We become more connected, more mobile, more cloud driven. They're only going to increase, and the advent of AI is going to change that dimension greatly. Security breaches have already hit many, many leading companies, and it's clear that the ground rules are changing. We need to be prepared for it. We also have to be prepared for the fact that they're going to continually change as we move forward. And AI is probably going to accelerate that. Leverage these top 10 security practices, and reach out to Extreme. Talk to us. We'll show you how our security solutions can help, particularly when they pertain to these 10 practices. I think I pointed that out at a higher level within this presentation, but we can come and give you a further detail, and we can actually support you in segment design, things of that nature with the fabric to help you create a more secure posture. Be sure to attend our session on the threat landscape. I referred to it a couple times. And also be sure to attend our session on Extreme Cloud Universal ZTNA. I mentioned that a couple times as well. Once you attend the 3 sessions, this one, including these 2, you'll have a very good idea of where we're at and why we're there from Extreme's perspective. Once again, it's one cloud, one network, one Extreme, all transforming into an infinite enterprise, and with the appropriate posture and practice, a secure infinite enterprise. Thank you very much. I'm Ed Kohler, signing off.